My name is Helen, and today I want to share with you the most painful chapter of my life. This is a story about betrayal, about being abandoned at the moment when I needed support the most, and about finding the strength to rebuild my life when everything fell apart. I share this not for sympathy, but because I know there are other women out there who have experienced similar pain, and I want them to know they are not alone. I was 20 years old when I married Marcus in the spring of 1998. We had met at college where we were both studying business administration. Marcus was charming, ambitious, and seemed to have his whole future mapped out. He talked about the life we would build together, the house we would buy, the family we would raise. I fell in love with not just who he was, but who he promised we would become together. Our wedding was held in my parents' backyard in Portland, Maine. It was a modest celebration, nothing extravagant, but it was filled with love and hope. Marcus's parents seemed pleased with the match, and my parents adored him. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful man so young. The first year of our marriage was everything I had dreamed it would be. We rented a small apartment near downtown, and both of us worked entry-level jobs at different companies. Money was tight, but we were building our life together. We would cook dinner together in our tiny kitchen, watch movies on our secondhand couch, and make plans for our future. Marcus was attentive and loving, and I felt secure in our relationship. When I discovered I was pregnant at 21, Marcus seemed genuinely thrilled. He immediately started talking about converting our spare room into a nursery, about all the things he wanted to teach our child, about what kind of father he wanted to be. His excitement was contagious. And despite my nervousness about becoming a parent so young, I felt confident that we would face this new chapter together. Around the same time I found out about the pregnancy, Marcus received a promotion at his company. He had been working in the marketing department, and they offered him a position as assistant marketing director with a significant raise. It was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been hoping for, and the timing seemed perfect. With a baby on the way, the extra income would make a huge difference. The promotion meant Marcus would be working more closely with the senior management team, including a woman named Victoria, who was the marketing director. Marcus came home from his first day in the new position, talking excitedly about Victoria, about how impressive she was, how much he was going to learn from her. I was happy for him, pleased that he had found a mentor who could help advance his career. As my pregnancy progressed, Marcus's work schedule became increasingly demanding. He started coming home later, explaining that Victoria had high standards and expected the team to put in extra hours. There were evening meetings, weekend strategy sessions, and urgent projects that couldn't wait. I understood that the new position came with greater responsibilities, so I tried to be supportive even though I was missing having him around as much. During my second trimester, I started experiencing more severe pregnancy symptoms. The morning sickness had never really gone away, and I was exhausted all the time. Working full-time while dealing with pregnancy fatigue was challenging, but I pushed through because we needed my income. I would come home exhausted, hoping to spend the evening with Marcus, only to find he was still at the office. When Marcus was home, he seemed distracted. He would spend hours on his laptop or his phone, claiming he was dealing with work issues. When I tried to talk to him about the pregnancy, about baby names or nursery ideas, he would listen with half his attention while checking his messages. I told myself he was just stressed about the new job, that things would settle down once he adjusted to his increased responsibilities. There were small signs that should have alerted me to what was happening, but I was too trusting or perhaps too naive to recognize them. Marcus started dressing better for work, paying more attention to his appearance. He would shower as soon as he got home, even on days when he claimed to have been stuck in meetings all day. His phone was always face down on the table, and he became protective of it in a way he never had been before. When I was about 6 months pregnant, I suggested that Marcus should start coming to my prenatal appointments with me. I wanted him to be involved, to hear the baby's heartbeat, to see the ultrasound images. But Marcus always had an excuse. There was an important meeting he couldn't miss, a deadline that Victoria needed him to meet, a client presentation he had to prepare. He promised he would come to the next one, but the next one never seemed to work with his schedule either. I started feeling increasingly isolated and alone during what should have been an exciting time in our lives. My body was changing. I was growing a human being, and I wanted my husband to be present and engaged. Instead, I felt like I was going through this experience by myself while Marcus was consumed by his career. My sister Amanda noticed the change in Marcus's behavior before I was willing to acknowledge it. She would come over to visit, And when Marcus came home hours later than expected, Amanda would give me concerned looks. She asked me once if everything was okay in my marriage, if Marcus was being supportive during the pregnancy. I assured her that everything was fine, that Marcus was just working hard to provide for our growing family. But Amanda wasn't convinced. She told me to pay attention, to trust my instincts if something felt wrong. At the time, I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. Amanda had always been skeptical of Marcus, thought I had married too young, and I assumed she was just looking for problems that didn't exist. As I entered my 3rd trimester, the physical challenges of pregnancy increased. I had developed gestational diabetes and had to carefully monitor my diet and blood sugar levels. My doctor put me on modified bed rest for the last month before my due date. Concerned about my blood pressure, I had to stop working, which meant we were down to just Marcus's income. Being home all day gave me too much time to think and notice things I had been too busy to see before. I noticed that Marcus would receive text messages at odd hours and would step into another room to respond to them. I noticed that he seemed happier when he left for work than when he came home. I noticed that when I tried to initiate physical intimacy, he would claim to be too tired or too stressed. One evening when I was 7.5 months pregnant, I asked Marcus directly if there was something going on at work that he wanted to talk about. I told him I felt like he was pulling away from me, that I needed him to be more present as we prepared for the baby's arrival. Marcus assured me that I was imagining things, that pregnancy hormones were making me emotional and irrational. He said he was working hard for our family and that I should be grateful instead of suspicious. His response made me feel guilty for questioning him. I apologized for being difficult, for not being more supportive of his career. I told myself that I was being unfair, that Marcus was doing his best to provide for us. I pushed my doubts and concerns down, choosing to believe that everything would be fine once the baby arrived. My due date was April 20th. When that day came and went with no signs of labor, my doctor scheduled an induction for April 27th. I was nervous about the induction, having read stories about long and difficult induced labors, but I was also ready to finally meet my baby and move past the discomfort of late pregnancy. On the morning of April 27th, Marcus and I drove to the hospital at 6 a.m. I had my hospital bag packed with everything the baby and I would need. Marcus carried the bag into the hospital and held my hand as we checked in at the labor and delivery ward. For a moment, I felt hopeful that this experience would bring us closer together, that becoming parents would heal whatever distance had grown between us. The nurses got me settled into a labor room and started the induction process. They explained that it could take many hours for labor to progress, that first-time mothers often had long labors. My doctor came in to check on me and told Marcus he might want to grab some breakfast and coffee since we were in for a long day. After the doctor left, Marcus's phone rang. He stepped out into the hallway to take the call, and when he came back into the room, he looked distracted and anxious. He said there was an emergency at work, something that absolutely had to be dealt with immediately. I asked if it could wait, reminding him that I was in labor with his child. But Marcus insisted it would only take a few minutes. He told me he just needed to run out to the parking lot to grab his laptop from the car and make a quick phone call to resolve the work issue. He promised he would be right back, that he wouldn't miss anything important. I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to start our child's birth with an argument. Marcus kissed my forehead and left the room. I watched him walk down the hallway, his phone already pressed to his ear. The contractions were still mild at that point, manageable, and I tried to relax and focus on positive thoughts. I told myself Marcus would be back any minute, that he was just taking care of business so he could be fully present for the rest of labor. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. The contractions were getting stronger, and I was starting to need support and encouragement. I kept looking at the door, expecting Marcus to walk back in at any moment. My nurse asked where my husband was, and I explained that he had stepped out briefly to deal with a work emergency. The nurse gave me a sympathetic look that I didn't understand at the time. She suggested I call Marcus to let him know labor was progressing. I tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him, telling him I needed him to come back, that the contractions were getting intense. No response. 2 hours passed, then 3. Labor was progressing faster than expected, and the pain was becoming overwhelming. I was frightened and alone, surrounded by nurses I didn't know, facing one of the most intense physical experiences of my life, without my husband beside me. I kept calling Marcus's phone, leaving increasingly desperate messages, but he didn't answer and didn't come back. My sister Amanda arrived at the hospital around lunchtime. I had called her in tears, begging her to come because I was alone and scared and Marcus was missing. Amanda was furious. She immediately started calling Marcus, leaving angry voicemails demanding to know where he was and why he had abandoned me. Amanda held my hand through contractions, wiped my face with cool cloths, and tried to keep me calm and focused. But she couldn't replace Marcus. She couldn't be the person who had promised to be my partner through everything, who had pledged to be there in sickness and in health. I felt betrayed and heartbroken even as my body prepared to bring our child into the world. As labor intensified through the afternoon and into the evening, I called Marcus 15 more times. Each call went to voicemail. I was terrified, wondering if something terrible had happened to him. Had he been in an accident? Was he hurt or in danger? The not knowing was almost as painful as the contractions themselves. By early evening, my labor had progressed to the point where I needed an epidural. The anesthesiologist came in to administer it, and I had to curl forward through contractions while he inserted the needle into my spine. This was the moment when most husbands held their wives, offered comfort and support. I had my sister gripping my hands and a nurse supporting my back. But the absence of my husband was a gaping wound. After the epidural took effect and the pain became manageable, I had a moment to process the reality of my situation. Marcus had been gone for over 8 hours. He had left me alone for my entire labor, missing every moment of his child's birth. Whatever work emergency he had claimed to need to handle clearly wasn't resolved yet. Or he would have returned by now. But a small voice in the back of my mind was starting to whisper, something I didn't want to acknowledge. What if this wasn't about work at all? What if Marcus hadn't come back because he chose not to come back? What if he was exactly where he wanted to be, and that place wasn't with me? Around 9 o'clock that evening, after 15 hours of labor, my doctor announced that I was fully dilated and ready to start pushing. This was it, the moment when I would finally meet my baby. It should have been a moment of joy and excitement, but all I felt was grief and abandonment. My husband should have been here, and he wasn't. Amanda stood by my side as I pushed, coaching me through contractions and telling me how strong I was. The nurses were encouraging and supportive, but the chair where Marcus should have been sitting remained empty, a painful reminder of his absence during this momentous occasion. After 45 minutes of pushing, my son was born at 9:43 p.m. on April 27th. The doctor placed him on my chest, and I looked into the tiny face of my child for the first time. He was perfect, beautiful, everything I had hoped for. But even as I held him and cried tears of joy, I was also crying tears of heartbreak because his father wasn't there to meet him. The nurses helped me with the first feeding, showing me how to get my son to latch. They took his measurements and footprints, completed all the necessary paperwork. Through all of it, I kept glancing at the door, still hoping Marcus would appear with some reasonable explanation for his absence. It wasn't until the next morning, almost 24 hours after he had left to get his laptop from the car, that Marcus finally showed up at the hospital. He walked into my room with flowers and a sheepish expression, offering no explanation for where he had been or why he had abandoned me during labor and delivery. When I asked him where he had been, Marcus said he was so sorry that there had been a critical situation at work that he absolutely had to handle. He claimed his phone had died and he hadn't been able to charge it. He said by the time he finished dealing with the work crisis, he assumed I would have already given birth and he didn't want to disturb me while I was recovering. His explanations made no sense. Any reasonable person would have found a way to charge their phone or use someone else's phone to check in during a 16-hour absence. Any decent husband would have prioritized being present for his child's birth over any work situation. But I was exhausted, hormonal, and emotionally devastated. I didn't have the energy to push back against his lies. Marcus held our son, whom I had named Benjamin after my grandfather, and cooed at him appropriately. He took photos and called his parents to tell them about the birth. He acted like a proud new father who had been present for everything, and I was too tired and confused to confront him about the truth. We brought Benjamin home 3 days later, and I threw myself into caring for my newborn. The early weeks of motherhood were overwhelming, filled with sleepless nights, constant feedings, and the recovery from childbirth. Marcus went back to work after just 1 week of paternity leave, claiming that Victoria needed him back in the office for important projects. I was alone with Benjamin for 12 to 14 hours a day while Marcus was at work. I struggled with breastfeeding, with figuring out why Benjamin was crying, with the isolation of being a new mother without support. My sister visited when she could, but she had her own job and responsibilities. I had never felt so alone in my life. Marcus continued to work long hours, often coming home after Benjamin was already asleep. On weekends, he would claim to be too tired to help much with baby care. He said that since I was home all day, I should be doing the majority of the child care, and his contribution was to work hard and provide financially. I was too exhausted to argue. The distance between Marcus and me continued to grow. We barely spoke beyond logistical discussions about bills and schedules. Physical intimacy was non-existent, which I attributed to being tired and recovering from childbirth. But the emotional intimacy was also gone, and that hurt even more than the lack of physical connection. When Benjamin was 3 months old, I needed to use Marcus's laptop for something. Mine had stopped working, and I needed to look up information about Benjamin's vaccination schedule. Marcus was at work, and I didn't think he would mind if I borrowed his computer for a few minutes. I opened the laptop and went to pull up a web browser when I noticed that Marcus's email was already open. I wasn't intending to snoop, but a name caught my eye in one of the email previews. Victoria. I told myself to close the email and respect Marcus's privacy, but something made me click on the message instead. What I found destroyed me. The email was from Victoria to Marcus, and it was filled with intimate language and references to time they had spent together. There were mentions of hotel rooms, stolen moments, and expressions of love. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, unable to process what I was reading. I started scrolling through other emails, finding months of correspondence between Marcus and Victoria. The messages went back to shortly after Marcus started his new position, long before I had gotten pregnant. They had been having an affair for over a year, and I had been completely oblivious. But the worst discovery came when I found emails from late April. The date that stood out was April 27th, the day Benjamin was born. Victoria had emailed Marcus that morning, asking him to come over because she needed to see him. Marcus had responded that he would be there as soon as possible, that he would tell me there was a work emergency. I sat there with my sleeping baby in my arms, reading evidence that my husband had abandoned me during labor to be with his mistress. While I was alone and frightened, pushing our son into the world, Marcus had been in Victoria's bed. The work emergency had been a lie. His phone hadn't died. He had simply chosen her over me on the most important day of our lives. The pain of that realization was worse than anything I had experienced during childbirth. My husband had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, and he had done it at the moment when I was most vulnerable and needed him most. Every excuse he had made, every late night at work, every missed prenatal appointment, suddenly made horrible sense. I don't remember making the decision to confront Marcus. I just remember my hands shaking as I took photos of the emails with my phone, documenting the evidence of his affair. I was operating on autopilot, my brain trying to protect itself from the full emotional impact of what I had discovered. When Marcus came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with Benjamin. The laptop opened beside me, showing his email inbox. Marcus walked in, saw what I was looking at, and went pale. For a long moment, we just stared at each other while Benjamin made soft baby noises between us. I asked Marcus a simple question. Where were you on April 27th, between the hours of 7 in the morning and 9 at night? Marcus opened his mouth to offer some explanation, but I cut him off. I told him I had read the emails, that I knew about Victoria, that I knew he had spent the day of our son's birth with his mistress instead of with me. Marcus didn't even try to deny it. He just closed his eyes and sank into a chair, all the energy seeming to drain out of him. When he finally spoke, he said he was sorry, that he had never meant for any of this to happen, that the affair with Victoria had just developed despite his intentions. I asked him how long it had been going on. Marcus admitted that he and Victoria had started their relationship about a year ago, just a few months after he started working with her. He said they had tried to end it several times, but they kept being drawn back together. He claimed he still cared about me, but that he was in love with Victoria. The words felt like knives. I had been building a family with this man, carrying his child, believing we had a future together, while he was in love with someone else. I asked him why he had stayed, why he hadn't just told me the truth before I got pregnant. Marcus said he had thought he could make it work, that he could be a good husband and father, while also maintaining his relationship with Victoria. I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I found the emails. Why did he leave me alone during labor? Why did he choose to spend that day with Victoria instead of being there for the birth of his son? Marcus looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He said Victoria had been upset that morning, needing emotional support, and he thought he could just check on her quickly and be back before labor. Really got going. But one thing led to another, he explained, and by the time he realized how much time had passed, it was already too late. He said he knew he had made a terrible mistake, that he would regret that decision for the rest of his life. His words rang hollow, another set of excuses from a man who had proven he couldn't be trusted. I asked Marcus what he wanted. Did he want to try to save our marriage, or did he want to be with Victoria? Marcus was quiet for a long time before he answered. He said he thought it would be better for everyone if we separated. He said he wanted to be with Victoria, that he couldn't keep living a lie, and that I deserved someone who could love me the way I deserved to be loved. The conversation that followed was surreal. We discussed the practical aspects of ending our marriage as if we were negotiating a business deal. Marcus said he would move out, that he would pay child support, that we could work out a custody arrangement for Benjamin. He was calm and reasonable, as if he hadn't just blown up our entire family. Within a week, Marcus had moved out of our apartment and into Victoria's place. He took his clothes and personal items but left most of the furniture and household goods. He set up an account to automatically transfer child support payments each month, and he scheduled one evening per week to visit Benjamin. I was 22 years old, alone with a 3-month-old baby, trying to process the complete destruction of the life I had imagined. My parents were supportive but lived several hours away and couldn't provide daily help. My sister did what she could, but she had her own life. I was essentially on my own. The financial reality of single motherhood hit me immediately. Marcus's child support covered the basics, but it wasn't enough to maintain our lifestyle. I had to find a cheaper apartment, move to a less expensive neighborhood, and figure out how to return to work while caring for an infant. The stress was overwhelming. Finding childcare that I could afford was nearly impossible. Daycare costs were astronomical, more than I could earn at most entry-level jobs. I ended up taking a position working night shifts at a hospital doing medical billing, so I could care for Benjamin during the day and work while he slept at night. I was exhausted all the time, running on maybe 4 hours of sleep per day, but I had no other options. Marcus's involvement with Benjamin was minimal and inconsistent. He would show up for his scheduled weekly visit, play with Benjamin for an hour or two, and then leave. He rarely called to check on Benjamin during the week, didn't ask about developmental milestones or doctor appointments, and seemed content to be a peripheral figure in his son's life. What hurt most was seeing photos on social media of Marcus and Victoria together, smiling and happy, living the life that should have been mine. They took vacations together, went to fancy restaurants, attended concerts and events. Meanwhile, I was struggling to pay rent and buy diapers, working myself to exhaustion while raising our son alone. About a year after our separation, I learned through mutual friends that Marcus and Victoria were getting married. The news felt like another betrayal, even though our divorce had been finalized months earlier. Marcus was moving on, building a new life with the woman he had chosen over me and Benjamin. Even worse, within a year of their marriage, Victoria became pregnant. Then pregnant again shortly after their first child was born. Marcus was building a family with Victoria, being the engaged and present father to her children that he had never been with Benjamin. My son had to watch his father create a new family, while barely maintaining a relationship with him. Benjamin would come back from visits to Marcus's house and tell me about his half-siblings, about the fun things they did together, about how Daddy played with them and read them stories. Each story was a knife in my heart because Marcus was giving those children everything he had refused to give Benjamin. The child support payments that Marcus sent were the bare minimum required by law, never increasing even as his career advanced and his income grew. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs to make ends meet, sacrificing my own health and well-being to provide for Benjamin. I developed chronic migraines from stress and lack of sleep. I had no social life, no time for friends or dating, no opportunity to build a life beyond survival. As Benjamin got older, he started asking questions about why his daddy didn't live with us, why he only saw him once a week, why his half-siblings got to be with Daddy all the time while he didn't. These conversations broke my heart because I didn't know how to explain to a young child that his father had chosen another family over him without damaging his sense of self-worth. I struggled with bitterness and anger for years. I would lie awake at night replaying that day in the hospital, imagining different scenarios where I had somehow prevented Marcus from leaving or where I had discovered his affair before Benjamin was born. I tortured myself with what-ifs and might-have-beens, unable to move past the betrayal. The psychological impact of what Marcus had done affected every aspect of my life. I had trust issues that made it impossible to consider dating anyone else. I was hypervigilant about Benjamin's well-being, terrified that something would happen to him because I had already lost so much. I isolated myself, building walls to protect against further pain. But slowly, with the help of therapy and the support of my sister and parents, I began to heal. I realized that Marcus's betrayal said everything about his character and nothing about my worth. I accepted that I couldn't change the past, couldn't force Marcus to be the father Benjamin deserved, and couldn't waste more years of my life being angry about things I couldn't control. I focused on being the best mother I could be for Benjamin. I made sure he knew he was loved and valued, even if his father wasn't present. I worked hard to provide stability and security, even when it required sacrifice. I modeled resilience and strength, showing Benjamin that we could thrive despite the challenges we faced. As Benjamin grew into a thoughtful, kind young man, I could see that my efforts had paid off. Yes, he was hurt by his father's absence, and the clear preference Marcus showed for his other children. But Benjamin also learned important lessons about character, about the difference between what people say and what they do, about choosing to show up for the people you love. Today, at 45 years old, I can look back on that painful time with less raw emotion. I understand now that Marcus was a weak man who made selfish choices and that I am better off without him. The marriage I thought I wanted would have been a lifetime of betrayal and disappointment. Being forced to start over at 22 was devastating, but it also gave me the opportunity to build a life on my own terms. Benjamin is now 23, the same age I was when Marcus left. He has grown into an incredible young man despite having an absent father. He recently became engaged to a wonderful woman, and watching them together gives me hope that he learned from his father's mistakes and will be the kind of husband and father that Marcus never was. Marcus and I have minimal contact now. He sends birthday cards to Benjamin and occasionally shows up for major events. But their relationship is distant and strained. Benjamin has made peace with having a father who chose not to be present, and he has built a life filled with people who truly love and support him. The woman I am today is not the naive 20-year-old who trusted blindly and believed that love was enough. I have learned that actions matter more than words, that people show you who they are through their choices, and that self-respect means walking away from those who don't value you. I share this story because I know there are other women who have been abandoned at their most vulnerable moments, who have been betrayed by partners they trusted, who have had to rebuild their lives from nothing while caring for children alone. I want them to know that survival is possible, that healing happens even when it seems impossible, that life on the other side of betrayal can be good and meaningful. The day Marcus left me, alone in that hospital room to give birth to his son while he was with his mistress, will always be one of the most painful memories of my life. But it also became the moment that defined who I would become. I chose to survive, to fight, to build a life for my son and myself that wasn't dependent on a man who had proven he couldn't be trusted. I am proud of the mother I became, proud of the son I raised, and proud of the strength I found within myself during the darkest time of my life. Marcus took a lot from me, but he couldn't take my ability to love, to hope, and to create meaning from pain. That is something I kept for myself and my son, and it has made all the difference. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, please know that you are stronger than you think. The betrayal you experienced does not define you. Your ability to survive it, to keep going for your children, to rebuild your life, that is what defines you. You are not alone. And there is hope for a better future, even when everything feels hopeless.